"Sir, do not drink from that glass." The little girl's voice was so quiet that, in a room filled with laughter, music, and the sound of crystal touching crystal, almost nobody heard her. Almost. Alessandro Romano had spent 30 years learning to recognize danger before it arrived. He had watched powerful people smile while hiding their true intentions, and he had built an empire by noticing what others ignored. But on the night of his engagement celebration, surrounded by hundreds of guests inside his family mansion, the person who stopped him was the one person nobody expected to matter. A 6-year-old girl wearing a pink cardigan and holding a small stuffed rabbit. Lily Carter stood near the edge of the grand dining room, where she had been waiting beside her mother, Elena, one of the household employees. She was not supposed to be part of the celebration. She was not supposed to speak to important guests. She was not supposed to interrupt a moment that had been carefully planned for months. But Lily looked at the 2 wine glasses on the table and knew something had changed. Alessandro was moments away from sitting down at the center of the long marble table. Victoria Loran, the woman he was about to marry, stood beside him with a perfect smile. Cameras were capturing every second. Family members watched proudly. Business partners raised their glasses. Everything looked exactly how a powerful man's perfect evening should look. Then Lily stepped forward. "Sir, she switched the wine glasses before you sat down." The room became silent. Not because everyone believed her. Most people did not. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. One of the servers lowered his eyes. Someone near the table quietly whispered that children sometimes misunderstood things. Victoria immediately turned toward Lily with a gentle expression. "Sweetheart, I think you may have seen something different than what happened," she said softly. To everyone else, it sounded kind. Caring, even. But Alessandro noticed something unusual. Victoria did not ask Lily what she saw. She did not ask why the child was worried. She asked how Lily knew. Alessandro looked at the 2 glasses in front of him. They were identical. Same shape. Same color. Same elegant design chosen for the engagement dinner. To anyone else, they were just glasses. But Lily kept looking at them. She did not look scared. She did not look proud. She looked certain. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Alessandro said. Elena immediately stepped closer, embarrassed and nervous. "Mr. Romano, I apologize. Lily should not have interrupted. She is only a child." Alessandro raised his hand gently, stopping her. "No one is being punished for telling me something they believe is important." Lily looked around the room before answering. She saw all the expensive suits, the jewelry, the people who seemed to belong there. She knew many of them would not believe her. But she pointed carefully toward the table. "That glass was closer to you before," she said. "Then she moved them." Alessandro did not react immediately. He had learned that showing emotion gave other people information. But inside, one small detail bothered him. Lily was not accusing Victoria. She was describing an action. A simple action she believed she had seen. The guests wanted a quick answer. They wanted the celebration to continue. They wanted the perfect image to remain untouched. But Alessandro looked at the table again. The music was still playing. The candles were still burning. The engagement ring on Victoria's hand was still shining. Everything looked beautiful. And somehow, that made the moment feel even more wrong. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets are not hidden in dark places. Sometimes they sit in the middle of a room full of people, waiting for the one person everyone ignores to notice them. Alessandro slowly moved his hand away from the glass. Then he looked at Lily and asked the question nobody else thought to ask. "Why did you remember that?" And for the first time that evening, the entire room waited for the answer of the smallest person there. The question stayed in the air longer than anyone expected. "Why did you remember that?" Alessandro asked again, looking directly at Lily. Around the dining room, the guests waited for a simple answer, but Lily did not rush. She looked down at her small hands, then back at the table. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was not trying to prove she was smarter than the adults around her. She was simply trying to explain what her eyes had seen. "Because I was putting the napkins away," Lily said softly. "I saw the glasses before everyone came here." A few people exchanged doubtful looks. To them, it was just a child's memory. A misunderstanding during a formal dinner. Nothing more. Victoria smiled politely and stepped closer. "Alessandro, perhaps we should not make this bigger than it is." She is a sweet child, but she may have confused one moment with another. Her voice was calm. Her expression was gentle. Anyone watching from outside the room would have believed she was protecting Lily. But Alessandro noticed something different. Victoria kept looking at the glasses. Not at Lily. Not at Elena. At the glasses. Alessandro had spent years studying people under pressure. He knew that fear did not always appear as panic. Sometimes it appeared as someone trying too hard to control the situation. Elena quietly apologized again. "Mr. Romano, I am sorry. Lily should not have interrupted your evening." Her words carried the weight of someone who knew her place in the room. She had worked in the mansion for years. She understood the invisible rules. Important people spoke. Employees listened. Children stayed quiet. But Alessandro looked at Lily, and then at Elena. He noticed something uncomfortable. The people dismissing Lily were not asking whether she was right. They were deciding she could not be right because of who she was. "Bring me the serving records," Alessandro told his head of staff. The room shifted immediately. A few guests stopped smiling. Victoria's expression changed for only a second before returning to normal. It was a tiny moment. Less than a second. But Alessandro saw it. The records arrived quickly. The staff list appeared. The wine service schedule appeared. Everything looked organized. Everything looked professional. The kind of details people trusted because they were written down. Alessandro studied the papers carefully. Then he looked at Lily. "You said the glasses moved. Did you see who moved them?" Lily shook her head. "No, sir. I only saw her touch them." "Did you see anything else?" he asked. Lily thought carefully. She did not guess. She did not add details that were not there. "The tablecloth was different," she said. Several people looked confused. It seemed like such a small thing. A tablecloth. Something nobody important would care about during an engagement celebration. But Alessandro noticed the way Lily said it. She was not making a story. She was remembering. Victoria laughed softly. "A tablecloth? Alessandro, surely we are not going to investigate every little thing a child notices." The sentence sounded harmless. But Alessandro heard something underneath it. A desire to close the conversation before the details connected. He turned toward the staff member responsible for preparing the room. "Was the table prepared exactly as planned?" The employee hesitated. Just for a moment. "Yes, sir. Almost exactly." Almost. That single word changed the atmosphere. Alessandro leaned back slightly. The evening that had looked perfect was beginning to show small cracks. Lily had not uncovered a complete answer. She had not solved anything. She had only pointed toward the first unusual detail. And sometimes, the first unusual detail was where every hidden truth began. Alessandro looked again at the two glasses, then at the table beneath them. The celebration was still happening around him, but his attention had moved somewhere else entirely. "Find out who changed that table," he said quietly. And across the room, someone who had been completely confident a few minutes earlier suddenly stopped smiling. The question was no longer whether Lily had misunderstood what she saw. The question was why so many adults were hoping she had. The word almost stayed with Alessandro long after the guests returned to their conversations. The music continued. The waiters continued moving between tables. People continued smiling as if nothing unusual had happened. But Alessandro Romano was no longer watching this celebration. He was watching the details. He had built his reputation by understanding that the truth rarely announced itself with something obvious. It appeared in small mistakes. A missing signature. A changed schedule. A person standing where they should not be. And now, for the first time that evening, a 6-year-old girl had pointed him toward one of those small mistakes. The dining room staff began checking the preparation records, while Alessandro remained near the table. Lily stood beside her mother, Elena, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly. She looked uncomfortable with all the attention. She did not look like someone who wanted to be involved. She looked like someone who wished she could disappear back into the background. Alessandro noticed that too. "Lily," he said quietly, lowering his voice so the room would not feel so overwhelming. "Tell me about the tablecloth." Lily looked at the table carefully. "The first one had a flower pattern near the corner," she said. "This one does not." Several people glanced down. Most had never noticed. Why would they? The tablecloth was white, elegant, and perfectly matched with the rest of the decoration. But near one corner, hidden beneath the plates and silverware, there was a small difference. The original design had a stitched flower pattern. The replacement did not. Alessandro touched the edge of the cloth without disturbing anything. His expression remained calm, but his attention sharpened. A simple change. Almost meaningless. Unless it explained how someone had access to the table before the toast. "Who replaced the tablecloth?" Alessandro asked. The head of household staff checked the schedule. "According to the records, no replacement was made after the room was prepared." That answer created a silence different from before. Not confusion. Concern. Because now there was a fact that did not fit. Someone had changed something in the room, but the record said nobody had. Victoria stepped forward with a concerned expression. "Alessandro, perhaps the staff simply forgot to update the paperwork. It happens." Her explanation sounded reasonable. That was exactly why it was difficult to challenge. A careless mistake was easier to believe than a hidden plan. Alessandro looked at her. "Perhaps," he replied, but he did not sound convinced. He turned back toward the staff records. "Who had access to this room before the guests arrived?" The list was brought forward. Staff members. Event coordinators. The wine service team. Everything appeared normal. Until Alessandro noticed one name that did not belong. A temporary event assistant had signed in earlier than expected. The name was familiar. Not because Alessandro knew the person. Because the person had been recommended by someone close to Victoria. It was not proof. Not yet. But it was a connection. Lily watched silently as the adults studied papers and asked questions. She did not understand the business side of what was happening. She only understood that something about the evening felt different. Alessandro noticed her watching. "You did the right thing by speaking up," he told her. Elena looked surprised. She had expected an apology from her daughter. Instead, Alessandro thanked her. But he did not tell Lily that she had solved anything. He did not make her responsible for what happened next. He simply respected that she had shared what she saw. That small decision changed something in the room. The people who had dismissed Lily began looking at her differently. Not because she had power. Because she had noticed what they missed. Alessandro looked again at the table. The changed cloth. The unusual staff record. The 2 wine glasses waiting exactly where they had been left. One small detail had become 2. 2 had become 3. And now the question was no longer whether Lily had imagined something. The question was who had been preparing the room before anyone arrived. As Alessandro walked away from the table, his security advisor quietly approached him with new information. "Sir, there is something else you should see." Alessandro stopped. "What is it?" The advisor looked at the report in his hand. "The camera footage from the dining room has a gap. Right before the toast." For the first time that night, Alessandro's calm expression changed. Because a missing moment was not a small mistake. It was someone trying to make sure a moment was never seen. The camera footage should have shown the truth. Instead, it showed nothing. Alessandro Romano stood inside his private office, watching the security report on the large screen while the engagement celebration continued downstairs. A few minutes earlier, the room had been filled with music and laughter. Now, all he could see was a missing piece of time. "The gap is exactly 8 minutes," his security advisor explained. "From the moment the dining room was prepared until the moment the guests entered." Alessandro looked at the screen without speaking. 8 minutes. 8 minutes when someone could move a tablecloth, adjust 2 wine glasses, and leave behind a room that appeared untouched. It was not proof of a crime. It was not enough to accuse anyone. But it was enough to ask a different question. Who needed those 8 minutes to disappear? Back in the dining room, Victoria remained composed. She continued greeting guests and thanking them for their patience. To everyone watching, she looked like the same elegant woman who had planned a beautiful evening. But Alessandro noticed something important. She was not asking about the missing camera footage. She was asking who had access to this security system. That difference stayed in his mind. Meanwhile, Lily sat quietly near her mother in a smaller room away from the crowd. Elena had brought her there because she believed her daughter had already experienced too much attention. "You should not worry about grown-up problems," Elena whispered. Lily looked down at her stuffed rabbit. "I was only saying what I saw." Elena held her hand. "I know, sweetheart." But both of them understood something difficult. Telling the truth was not always easy when people decided your voice mattered less. A short time later, Alessandro entered the room. Lily immediately stood up, thinking she had done something wrong. But Alessandro simply sat nearby. "I need your help with one thing," he said. "Not to investigate. Not to solve anything. Just to remember." Lily nodded. Alessandro placed a simple drawing of the dining table on a piece of paper. "Can you show me where the glasses were before they moved?" Lily carefully pointed. Then she pointed to another place. "And where they were after." Alessandro studied the drawing. The information matched what the staff records suggested. But he noticed something else. Lily had placed the glasses slightly apart from the center of the table. "Why there?" he asked. Lily looked surprised by the question. "Because the candle was there." Alessandro looked at the table layout again. The candles, the plates, the decorations. Something about the arrangement suddenly made sense. The glasses had not been moved randomly. They had been moved while someone was preparing the table from the side, where the candles blocked the view of the guests entering later. It was a small detail. One a child noticed because she was closer to the table than anyone else. One the adults ignored because they were focused on the celebration. Alessandro returned to the security report and asked for a complete review of the missing footage. This time, he asked a different question. Not, "Who deleted the video?" but, "Who knew exactly when the cameras would not be watched?" The answer came faster than expected. A temporary event assistant had requested a security system check earlier that evening. The request had been approved through an internal message. The name attached to that approval was not random. It belonged to someone connected to Victoria's personal circle. Alessandro read the message carefully. Then he placed the phone down. He did not show anger. He did not make accusations. He simply understood that the situation had changed. This was no longer about a child misunderstanding a glass on a table. Too many small details were now pointing in the same direction. The missing camera, the changed tablecloth, the unfamiliar staff member, the moved glasses. One detail could be ignored. 2 details could be explained. But 4 details created a pattern. Alessandro returned to the dining room, where Victoria was still smiling beside their guests. He looked at the woman he had planned to marry and realized something painful. The person closest to him might not be the person protecting him. The next step would require patience. He needed more than suspicion. He needed proof that no one could dismiss. And somewhere inside the mansion, someone was beginning to realize Alessandro Romano was no longer simply accepting the perfect story they had prepared for him. The celebration continued downstairs, but Alessandro Romano had stopped celebrating. While guests enjoyed dinner and conversation, he sat alone in his office reviewing every piece of information gathered from the evening. He had spent years building a world where every decision had a reason, every person had a role, and every risk had a response. But now, a 6-year-old girl had shown him something his entire system had missed. The truth was hidden inside ordinary details. A tablecloth, a missing camera recording, 2 wine glasses that looked exactly the same. Alessandro placed the security report on his desk and looked at the timeline again. The missing footage began at 7:42 p.m. The room preparation record showed a temporary assistant entered the dining area at 7:39 p.m. 3 minutes before the camera stopped recording. That was not enough to prove anything, but it was enough to continue asking questions. He called his security advisor back into the office. "I want everything connected to that assistant," Alessandro said. "Not rumors. Not assumptions. Only facts." The advisor nodded and returned a few minutes later with a folder. Inside were access records, event messages, and payment details. The temporary assistant had been hired through an outside event company. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The company had worked with many luxury events before. But one detail stood out. The recommendation had come from someone inside Victoria's personal network. Alessandro studied the document carefully. He did not immediately accuse Victoria. He knew better than that. A powerful person who reacted too quickly often made mistakes. Instead, he looked for the missing piece that connected everything. Meanwhile, Lily sat with her mother in a quiet hallway away from the guests. Elena gently fixed her daughter's cardigan and asked if she was feeling better. Lily nodded. "Did I make everyone upset?" she asked. Elena paused before answering. "Some people do not like hearing things they are not ready to accept." Lily looked toward the dining room. "But I only told what I saw." Elena smiled sadly. "Sometimes that is the hardest thing to do." A few minutes later, Alessandro found Lily again. This time, he brought something with him. A photograph from the event preparation. It showed the dining table before the guests arrived. "Can you tell me if this is the same table you saw?" he asked. Lily looked carefully. She did not answer immediately. Alessandro noticed that. She was not guessing. She was comparing. Finally, she pointed to the corner of the picture. "The candle was moved," she said. Alessandro looked closer. She was right. The candle arrangement in the photograph was slightly different from the final setup. That small change explained something important. Someone had created a better view of the glasses from one side of the table. It was not random decoration. It changed how someone could approach the table without being noticed. Alessandro did not tell Lily what the discovery meant. He simply thanked her and allowed her to return to her mother. He understood something important about her. Lily was not searching for secrets. She was simply paying attention. Back in his office, Alessandro connected the new information with everything else. The changed tablecloth, the altered candle position, the missing camera footage, the unknown assistant, the unusual recommendation. Each piece alone was weak. Together, they created a direction. His advisor then placed another document on the desk. "Sir, there is one more thing. The assistant's payment was not processed by the event company." Alessandro looked up. "Who paid?" The advisor hesitated. "A private account connected to a consulting group that recently contacted Miss Lauron." For a moment, Alessandro said nothing. The name on the paper changed the entire meaning of the evening. The wine glasses were not the beginning of the problem. They were only the first visible sign. The real plan was hidden somewhere deeper. Alessandro closed the folder and looked toward the lights of the celebration below. Everyone in that room believed they were witnessing the beginning of a marriage. But Alessandro now wondered if they had almost witnessed the beginning of something else. A carefully prepared plan built on trust, appearances, and the belief that nobody would look closely enough. Nobody except a little girl, who noticed the table before anyone noticed the truth. The next morning, Alessandro Romano did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He stopped looking at people and started looking at systems. For years, his instincts had protected him. He could enter a room and understand who held power, who wanted something, and who was hiding behind a smile. But this time, the danger had not come from a stranger. It had come from a carefully designed image of perfection. Victoria Lauron had built an evening where everything looked beautiful. The flowers, the music, the guests, the promise of a future together. And somewhere inside that perfect picture was a plan that depended on one thing. Everyone believing what they wanted to believe. Alessandro sat in his office, with the evidence spread across the desk. The temporary assistant, the missing camera footage, the changed table arrangement, the private payment. None of it was enough alone. But together, the details created a pattern that could no longer be ignored. His advisor placed another file in front of him. "There is something else you should see." Inside were copies of contract revisions connected to the upcoming marriage agreement. At first glance, they looked like normal legal updates. Changes in management structure. Adjustments in responsibilities. Small details that most people would overlook. But Alessandro did not overlook details anymore. He read every line carefully. The documents showed that after the marriage, certain financial decisions would move into a new structure controlled by a group of outside consultants. A group connected to the same company that had paid the temporary event assistant. Alessandro leaned back slowly. The meaning became clearer. The wine glasses were never the entire plan. They were a distraction. A moment designed to create an accident, confusion, and a reason for people to focus on the wrong thing, while a larger change moved quietly behind the scenes. "They were not trying to control one evening," Alessandro said. "They were trying to control what came after it." His advisor nodded. "That appears to be the case." Alessandro looked out the window of his office. Below, employees were beginning their morning routines. Among them was Elena Carter, returning to her normal duties, as if the previous night had never happened. Lily was with her, carrying her small stuffed rabbit and walking carefully beside her mother. Alessandro watched for a moment. The difference was impossible to ignore. The people with the most influence had missed the truth because they were focused on appearances. Lily had seen it because she was focused on what changed. Later that morning, Alessandro invited Elena and Lily to a quiet room. Elena immediately became nervous. She thought perhaps there was a problem because of the interruption at the dinner. "Mr. Romano, I apologize again for what happened," she said. Alessandro shook his head. "You do not need to apologize for your daughter telling the truth." Elena looked surprised. Those words meant more than Alessandro realized. For years, she had worked in rooms where people like her were expected to stay invisible. Lily sat in a chair with her rabbit in her lap, while Alessandro placed a small notebook on the table. "Can you draw the table from last night?" he asked. Lily carefully drew what she remembered. The candles, the glasses, the corner of the table, the direction people entered. Alessandro compared it with the official preparation records. The drawing revealed another small difference. A serving path had been changed. The person who approached the table had not used the normal route. It was another piece of the chain. Not enough to accuse someone. Enough to keep searching. Alessandro thanked Lily and closed the notebook. He did not tell her about the contracts or the financial plan. She was a child, and he refused to place adult burdens on her shoulders. But he made a decision that would change everything. He would no longer protect his reputation by ignoring uncomfortable truths. He would protect the truth, even when it came from someone nobody expected to hear. That afternoon, Alessandro met privately with his legal team and gave one instruction. Do not confront anyone yet. We need facts that cannot be denied. Because suspicion could start a conflict. But evidence could end a lie. And somewhere in the city, Victoria Laurent still believed she was in control. She did not know that the man she planned to manipulate had stopped looking at the perfect picture. He was finally looking at the details behind it. Alessandro Romano knew that the most dangerous moments were not always the loud ones. Sometimes, the most important decisions happened in silence, when nobody knew they were being watched. For the next several days, he continued acting as if nothing had changed. He attended meetings. He greeted guests. He stood beside Victoria at public events and allowed everyone to believe that the engagement celebration had ended without consequence. But behind that calm appearance, Alessandro was building a complete picture. He had made one decision that surprised even his closest advisors. He would not confront Victoria with suspicion. He would confront her with facts. If someone believes their story is perfect, they will eventually reveal the part they forgot to protect, Alessandro said. His team began reviewing every connection. The event assistant, the consulting company, the financial documents, the contract changes. Every detail created another link. Then they found something unexpected. The temporary assistant who accessed the dining room before the celebration had not been hired directly by Victoria. The person had been recommended through a separate business contact. At first, it looked like distance, a way for Victoria to avoid responsibility. But when Alessandro looked deeper, he found a pattern. The same consulting group had appeared in several conversations about the new marriage agreement. They were not just event planners. They were positioned to benefit from future decisions. It was not a simple betrayal. It was a carefully arranged system built around trust. Meanwhile, Lily returned to her normal routine. She spent her mornings with her mother and did not ask about the investigation. Alessandro respected that. He understood something important. Lily had helped because she cared, not because she wanted attention, money, or a place in his world. One afternoon, Alessandro saw Lily sitting quietly near the garden with her stuffed rabbit. He approached and asked a simple question. "Do you remember why you decided to tell me about the glasses?" Lily looked up. "Because everyone was smiling," she answered. "But the glasses were different." Alessandro was silent for a moment. That answer stayed with him. Everyone had been focused on the celebration, the music, the photographs, the image they wanted the world to see. Lily had focused on the one thing that changed. Later that evening, Alessandro received another update from his legal team. They had found messages between the consulting group and an outside account connected to the contract revisions. The messages did not directly mention the wine glasses. They did not reveal everything, but they showed planning, timing, coordination. the kind of preparation that did not happen by accident. Alessandro placed the documents on the table and looked through them carefully. He still needed more. A powerful accusation without complete proof could destroy innocent people and give the guilty ones a chance to escape behind confusion. So he made another choice. He would let them continue believing they were safe. He would allow them to make one mistake. One honest mistake that would connect every hidden piece together. His advisor looked surprised. "You are going to continue the engagement events?" Alessandro nodded. "Yes. Even after what we know." Alessandro looked toward the city lights outside his office. "Especially after what we know." Because he understood something now. Victoria's greatest advantage was not money or influence. It was the belief that nobody would question her. That people would accept the image she created. But images were fragile. Facts were not. The next week, Alessandro arranged a private meeting with the people closest to the situation. He invited Victoria, the consultants, and the staff members connected to the event. He did not accuse anyone. He did not reveal what he knew. Instead, he watched. He listened. He waited. And during that meeting, one small sentence changed everything. A consultant casually mentioned a detail that only someone involved with the hidden plan should have known. Alessandro did not react. He simply thanked everyone and ended the meeting. But after the door closed, his advisor looked at him. "You heard that too?" Alessandro nodded. The final connection had appeared. The people who thought they were controlling the story had accidentally revealed they knew the ending. Now Alessandro had what he needed. Not suspicion. Not assumptions. Proof was finally taking shape. And soon, the same room that celebrated a perfect engagement would become the place where the truth could no longer be hidden. The same dining room that once represented celebration now carried a completely different feeling. The flowers were still there. The long marble table was still polished. The crystal glasses still reflected the warm lights above. But this time, nobody came to celebrate. They came because Alessandro Romano wanted the truth to sit in the same place where the illusion had started. Alessandro stood at the head of the table, calm and silent. Around him were Victoria Loron, the consulting group representatives, several trusted staff members, and the people who had been connected to the engagement celebration. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone before the evidence was ready. He simply placed the facts in front of them one by one. First came the security records, the missing camera footage, the 8-minute gap before the toast. Then came the event access records showing who entered the room during that time. The room became quieter with every document. Victoria maintained her composed expression, but Alessandro noticed something important. She was no longer asking what happened. She was trying to understand how much he knew. Next came the table preparation records. The changed tablecloth. The altar candle arrangement. The unusual serving path. Details that once seemed meaningless now formed a clear pattern. Alessandro placed a photograph of the original table setup beside the final arrangement from the engagement night. "A single change can be an accident," he said. "But several changes made by different people create a pattern." Nobody answered. Then Alessandro revealed the contract documents. The same consulting group connected to the event assistant had also prepared revisions that would have shifted financial control after the marriage. The room changed immediately. The issue was no longer about a strange moment during a celebration. It was about a plan built around trust and hidden decisions. Victoria finally spoke. "Alessandro, you are making assumptions based on incomplete information." Her voice was calm, almost disappointed. For a moment, anyone watching might have believed her. But Alessandro had learned something during the past week. The most convincing lies were often the ones mixed with small pieces of truth. He placed another document on the table. A message from the consulting group. It did not mention every detail. It did not explain everything. But it contained one sentence that changed the entire situation. A sentence referring to the wine glasses before Alessandro had publicly mentioned them. Silence filled the room. Victoria looked at the document. Then she looked away. That small reaction was enough. Not because it proved everything by itself, but because it revealed knowledge she should not have had. Alessandro then did something nobody expected. He did not celebrate being right. He did not humiliate anyone. He turned toward the staff members who had been ignored during the investigation. For years, people assumed the most important voices in this house were the ones sitting at this table, he said. That was the mistake. His eyes moved toward Lily, who stood beside Elena near the doorway. She had not asked to be there. She had not demanded recognition. She was only there because Alessandro wanted everyone to understand where the first truth came from. Lily looked at the table quietly. The same table where she had noticed what everyone else missed. She did not know about contracts, Alessandro continued. She did not understand business plans. She saw one thing change, and she had the courage to say something. Elena held Lily's hand. For the first time that evening, nobody looked at them as background figures. They were witnesses. They were people whose words mattered. The final evidence was prepared for legal review. The consulting arrangements were frozen. The contracts were investigated. The people involved would answer for their actions through the proper systems. Alessandro understood that real justice was not about making someone lose everything in anger. It was about making sure the truth could not be hidden again. As the meeting ended, Victoria looked around the room that once admired her perfect image. The control she had relied on was gone. Not because Alessandro had taken it from her. Because the facts had finally become stronger than appearances. Outside the mansion, the city lights continued shining. Inside, Alessandro looked once more at the two wine glasses that had started everything. They were no longer symbols of danger. They were reminders of a lesson he would never forget. The smallest voice in the room had protected everyone because, for once, someone powerful decided to listen. Weeks after the engagement celebration, the Romano mansion felt different. The same walls remained. The same rooms were filled with expensive furniture and carefully chosen decorations. But something important had changed. The people inside the house no longer believed that the most powerful person was always the person with the loudest voice or the most important name. Alessandro Romano had learned a lesson that could not be written into any contract or protected by any security system. Truth did not always arrive through powerful people. Sometimes it arrived through someone standing quietly in the corner, waiting for someone to notice. The investigation into Victoria Laurent and the consulting group continued through the proper legal channels. The evidence collected from the engagement night was reviewed carefully. The altered documents, the hidden financial arrangements, the false access records, and the communication between those involved created a complete picture. Nobody was punished because of suspicion. Nobody was judged because of rumors. The consequences came from facts. That was exactly how Alessandro wanted it. He had spent much of his life surrounded by people who feared disappointing him. But now he understood something different. Fear could create silence. Trust created honesty. Elena Carter continued working at the mansion, but her relationship with the household changed. She was no longer treated as someone who simply followed instructions. Alessandro made sure employees had a proper way to raise concerns without worrying that their position would be threatened. For Elena, that change meant more than any gift or reward. It meant being respected. One afternoon, Alessandro found Lily sitting in the garden with her pink cardigan and her stuffed rabbit beside her. The little girl was drawing flowers on a piece of paper. Alessandro sat nearby and watched quietly for a moment. Are you drawing the table again? He asked. Lily smiled. No. Flowers this time. Alessandro smiled slightly. It was a small moment, but it showed how much had changed. He did not see Lily as the little girl who interrupted an important event. He saw her as a child who deserved to enjoy being a child. Do you know what happened because you spoke that night? Alessandro asked. Lily looked confused. I just told you what I saw. Those simple words stayed with him. She did not think she had done something extraordinary. She did not think she had saved a powerful man. She had simply done what was right. Alessandro looked toward the mansion behind them. For years, he had believed protecting his world meant controlling every detail. But Lily had shown him another truth. Sometimes protecting a world meant allowing people to speak before problems became disasters. Later that evening, Alessandro returned to his office and opened a small box on his desk. Inside were the 2 wine glasses from the engagement celebration. They were not kept as a symbol of betrayal. They were kept as a reminder that appearances could be carefully created, but truth always left traces. The smallest detail, the quietest voice, the person everyone overlooked. Alessandro placed the glasses back carefully and closed the box. He knew his life would continue to include difficult decisions. Power would always attract people with different intentions. But from that day forward, he promised himself one thing. He would never again measure the value of a person by their position in a room. At the next company meeting, Alessandro made a decision that surprised everyone. Before discussing major plans, he invited employees from every level of the organization to share concerns and ideas. Some executives questioned the change. They believed important decisions should remain with important people. Alessandro simply answered, "A room becomes dangerous when only powerful people are allowed to speak." Months later, Lily's name was still remembered in the Romano household, but not because she had been involved in a dramatic event. She was remembered because she showed everyone something simple. A person does not need wealth, status, or influence to recognize the truth. Sometimes the person with the least power sees the most clearly. And on the night when everyone was watching the celebration, the one person who truly saw what mattered was a little girl who noticed 2 glasses had moved. She did not change the world because she was powerful. She changed it because, when everyone else stayed silent, she chose to tell the truth.